Well, studying what our program would be tonight, and I didn't have anything really picked out, but since I've been working a lot with the guy about the murder of James Goddard and the hanging of Tillman Justice, and since I had just made contact with somebody from England, tracing their ancestors to Towns County, yep, and it involved a crime, so I had spent a great deal of time with that crime stuff, and so I came up with crime and punishment. Now, this program might be considered PG. It's not pretty warm and fuzzy type program. It's the other side of us. So, without further ado, I went through court records and newspaper articles, and you have in your seats newspaper articles about various and sundry crimes that I found that we're not talking about, so that's yours. You can keep anything there. So without further ado, crime and punishment in Towns County. This is Samuel Young Jameson, and one of the first court cases involving him was that he sued Enoch Allen, who on September the 6th, 1857, with force and arms, made an assault and did beat, whip, wound, and without sufficient cause or provocation, his slave named Baltimore. Allen was not the overseer, the owner, the employer, and he injured Jameson's slave, Baltimore, to the good order, peace, and dignity of Towns County.
And Mr. Allen was fined a whopping $4 compensation plus $10.64 court costs, about the total of a modern-day Big Mac meal at McDonald's.
How do we make this thing go? Okay. Okay, another case the same year was the state versus Chain Cathy, with the offense of keeping and maintaining a loot house.
She being a scandalous and evil-disposed person, and devising, contriving, and intruding the morals of diverse persons to debauch and corrupt for the practice of adultery and fornication contrary to the laws of said state.
Also charged in the next year were Edward Rogers, John Quarles, Mary Quarles, George Garner, Lewis Mason, and Joseph Rogers.
On January 3rd, 1858, with force and arms, did then and there in a grotesque and riotous, violent, and tumultuous, God, they use big words like that, manner assemble and gather together to disturb the public peace by fighting, cursing, whooping, hollering, and throwing rocks at the house of Kimbrough H. Watson, to his damage and to the disturbance of the public peace and other acts, in a violent and tumultuous manner contrary to the laws of said state, the good order, peace, and dignity thereof.
And by the way, Kimbrough H. Watson was the guy who sold to the new county of Towns the land to make the county seat on. Also, okay, so then the state versus Mary Dover, Betsy Redmond, Elizabeth Franklin for fornication, Jasper Patton for adultery with Sarah Swain. Now, if you're wondering what the difference between fornication and adultery, fornication are single people. Adultery, at least one of them's married. In addition to that, it was William Hooper and James Joyce for playing at cards for money. William Hooper and Hugh Crawford playing at cards for money. William Hooper and Manson Murphy playing at cards for money. Boy, he was a big gambler, wasn't he? Also, James C. for carrying a pistol, and John Lloyd and Edward Rogers for fighting.
And then State versus Andrew Michael and John Stroud, charged with entering the private property of Peter Stroud and rubbing and scattering manure and dung over the buggy cushions at the value of $5.
Guilty, guilty. Throw them in the can. Or charge them $5.
Following that was State versus James and David Silvey. Did buy from two slave women, one named Amy, the property of Myra Owenby, and one named Mary, the property of Lafayette Owenby, one ham of bacon, the value of $2, without written permission from the owners.
Slaves could not sell stuff except what they could make, like brooms, bed mats, floor mats, and stuff like that. So it insinuates that if they were selling the ham, they'd stolen it. Next case, the state versus John Anthony, Joseph Kilpatrick, and Joseph Rogers for a riot. The minutes say they were beating and kicking the door of the house of one Franklin Birch, and by then and there cursing, hollering, whooping, and drinking liquor, and by then and there entering the house of said Franklin Birch, being within the doors of said house, meaning they went inside, and there began cursing, fiddling, dancing, and making a great noise. Just FYI, I checked on Franklin Birch. He soon moved to Texas.
And then the state versus Joseph Kilpatrick for public indecency. Joseph Kilpatrick, on 3rd of August, 1858, did then and there strip off his clothing and walk throughout the streets of the town of Hiawassee, the same being a public place in the daytime, and did then and there expose his person naked in said streets, contrary to the laws, the good order, peace, and dignity thereof. Guilty, fined a whole whopping $5.
And then in 1859, they charged Jasper Stroud.
He was charged for the malicious mischief in that he did cut off and shave the tail of a certain horse belonging to the one to Jesse Osborn, my great-great-great-grandfather.
Guilty, throw him in the can. $5.
The state versus James B. Goddard for stabbing. Remember that name.
On the 13th of November, 1859, he badly cut up and beat up William R. McConnell, the town father, the father of Dr. F.C. McConnell from McConnell Church.
Well, following that,
on the next day,
the state versus William McConnell for assault and battery.
Because he did beat up James Goddard the next day. The judge dismissed all charges. He figured it was even.
The state versus Charles Alston for challenging Jasper England to a duel.
As much as you see the duels in the movies, they were illegal. And so the evidence was, they found the note where he challenged him to the duel. And the note said, "Sir, I heard from good authority that you have spoken slanderously of me behind my back, which I have every reason to believe to be true. Therefore, I wish to bring the matter to a close quickly in a case of honor, although it is rather degrading to put myself on an equality with a man of such low family and principles. Yet I think it is right that justice should take place. Therefore, if you will meet me within 24 hours, or earlier if convenient, at the state line of North Carolina, each of us with a rifle, shotgun, or pistol, in order to bring the matter to a quick and honorable conclusion. I require an answer within 1 hour after you receive this. Yours, Charles B. Alston." So he was placed under a $500 bond.
Wow.
Did anybody get shot?
No, that never happened.
The state versus James B. Goddard, again, for keeping open a tippling house on the Sabbath.
If you're wondering what a tipping house is, it's somewhere where you go to buy beverages and get tips. Okay, so he was charged this multiple times. And at this time of court, he was found guilty for three charges, and they charged him $40 plus court costs for each case.
Wow.
Ooh, that's
The state versus Posey Garrison and Floyd Cleveland for horse stealing.
They stole a black mare worth $500 and a sorrel mare with a white leg for $300.
The state versus William Campbell for murder. Said William Campbell, with a certain pistol in his right hand, pistol being charged with gunpowder and a leaden ball, did discharge and shoot said pistol in and upon the belly of Charles Hill near the navel, causing one mortal wound of the breadth of 1 inch and the depth of 10 inches, of which Charles Hill lingered and died afterward.
Just as a note, Charles Hill was the sheriff of Union County. He had just been elected right after the Civil War, and he was only in his 20s. He died in the line of duty, May the 17th, 1867, in Towns County, down on Gumlaw.
June 1872, Marmaduke Palmer, a lawyer from Cleveland, Georgia, was lynched by the KKK near Unicoi Gap in Towns County, Georgia. He had helped some of the Klan's victims. He was married to Josephine Ledford. Their daughter, Nellie, married Ed Osborn, son of Jesse Polk Osborn, and Lucinda Adeline Stroud of Towns County. They moved to Texas after this.
Not Marmaduke, because he is dead. He moved
The
to the
kids.
graveyard. He moved to the graveyard in Cleveland, and he's still hanging out down there.
We assume.
William McKinney versus D.L. Brown and Jesse Greenwood, who, with rocks, sticks, guns, and dogs, maimed and wounded, tore up, abused, and killed 5 hogs of his.
The State versus N.C. Nicholson, carrying a gun to Justice of Peace Court. Guilty $5 or 4 months in the chain gang.
So I don't know which one he did, chain gang or $5. $5 was hard to come by. All right, next, Sheriff Andrew P. Norton was fined $25 for refusing to lock up a prisoner. The grand jury said, in regard to our sheriff, we find him very derelict in the performance of his duty. As to the arrest of the parties charged with crimes, Sheriff Norton is useless.
In the March grand jury presentments, we call attention to the fact that Clingman Henson, who was charged with the offense of stealing a mule, as we are informed, was permitted to escape by neglected sheriff, and we desire his honor to take such steps as will prevent a repetition of such offense.
Make that sheriff do his job. All right, State versus Tillman C. Justice for murder. He was found guilty, and Judge Carlton Juan Wellborn sentenced him to between the hours of 10 o'clock in the forenoon and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, carried to such a place within 1 mile of the town of Hiawassee, which was right down in there. That's a natural amphitheater. So the higher grounds, people could get a good view of it. As may be provided by the ordinary, and that he be by said sheriff of said county, then and there publicly hanged by the neck until he's dead, on November the 18th, 1887. So I always knew about the hanging. My grandmother Taylor was at the hanging. She was a little girl, like 7 or 8 years old, and she told me about going. Her mother took her, and when it came time for the hanging, her mother picked her up and put her on the back of the wagon so she could see over the crowd. The belief that day and time was that public executions or public punishment was a deterrent to crime. Okay. So, my grandmother said that when it came time for them to pull the trap door and let the man fall down, that a shot rang out on the hillside back here. And so, I think that it was orchestrated so that the crowd would turn and not see the actual fall. So, I always knew about that. And the man's name was James B. Goddard. And Steve Eller back there knows exactly where he's buried. And Sandra, some of us have been to the grave. And so we knew about that. As for Goddard, he just showed up here like in 1856, 7, and 8, right after the county was formed. He was a lawyer. So new counties needed lawyers. So wherever he was from, he showed up here. That's all we knew about him, until he met his end up on Charlie's Creek by being murdered, brutally murdered. James B. Goddard was an informant to the Infernal Revenuers. And so they knew that or suspected that. And Tillman Justice had, he made moonshine. He drank moonshine. He lived on moonshine. And he got upset that old man Goddard had reported him. And so he was walking down the road one day up there on Cate City, Charlie's Creek, Smyrna, whatever you call that up there. and Jason Coward was walking with him. Now, Jason Coward had come over from Raven to visit him because his two sons were working in Tillman Steel. So they're walking down the road, and suddenly they see Old Man Goddard. And so the two sets of tracks, right? One track, it's January, it's cold. One set of tracks goes up and shoots him in the face with a shotgun. And if that's not enough, and when Old Man Goddard saw him coming, he got down on his knees and prayed, "Oh Lord, have mercy. Don't hurt me, Tillman," was his last words. And if the shot wasn't enough, he then took the gun and beat it, the court witness said, into splinters over his head. If that wasn't enough, he saw a rock nearby and beat, as the witness testified, his head into jelly.
Oh.
All right, so Old Man Goddard met his end that way. What? Oh, and he was a one-armed man too.
Oh.
Yeah. Go figure. Go figure. So there's two sets of tracks. One set of tracks goes up and murders, and the other one stands back. So at the trial, they're trying to figure out whose tracks went up and murdered. The shoemaker of the community, Jonathan Nicholson, positively swore without a doubt that the set of tracks that went up and murdered him was Tillman Justice's. Okay, remember this is cold weather, and the tracks had frozen into the ground. So that's how they knew so much about the tracks. So his tracks convicted him. So anyhow, that's all we knew about Old Man Goddard up here. So one day, I was driving down Denton Street, and the phone rang, and I did not know that number. But I answered it. Usually I don't, if I don't know the number. I answered it, and it was this man that Sandra Green had sicked on me, claiming to be a descendant of James B. Goddard. Well, I knew he didn't have any kids. I mean, he lived here and had 3 wives, but no kids, not even any stepkids. But this man told me he was a descendant of James Goddard. So I was very skeptical. And so I started asking him questions. And he answered them all correctly. So then I believed that he really was. So that family down in Milner, Georgia, near Barnesville, their story was he married Tamsy Buckaloo, and they had 3 little kids, and he was not Mr. Congeniality. He was mean. And the kids would hide in the cupboard from him. And so apparently her father ran him off, where he ended up in Fannin County at first, because see, this land was just being developed from the Indians. And then when Towns County was made, he came over here. So he has descendants. And this man, Bill Thomas, is a great whatever. And they didn't know what happened to it. They didn't know this end of it. And how they made the connection was, at one time, it was thought that Old Man Goddard's tombstone had been stolen. And it went out on the news all over. And so, them being Goddards, they, whoa, is this our ancestor? And so they checked it out, and he was their ancestor. So then we put their story together and this story together, and we had a more complete story of Old Man Goddard. So the guy on the phone, Bill Thomas, decided to write a book about his ancestor. He does do writing. He's retired from the military and took a case in creative writing, a course in creative writing, and this is his probably second one he's written. And I have helped him to make sure it's accurate, because I can't stand to see something written about this and it not be accurate. It has to be accurate. So I was on that book over and over, making sure it was accurate. It is accurate. and it is now off the press, and he named it the Field of Justice. Moonshine. Oh, that's spelled wrong. It's not accurate. Whoa! Moonshine and murder in North Georgia. So they invited me to come to their family reunion last Saturday or Saturday week or sometime, and I went to the reunion. However, he was so investigative about the whole thing. He found a descendant of Tillman Justice living in Rossville, and started the two of them talking. Well, the Goddard people had no idea about this. The Justice people had no idea about it. Really, they had no idea. So when Tillman was hanged, his least child was just a few months old. He took the child on his lap and loved on the child one last time. And so the guy in Roswell is a descendant of the little child that was on the lap. So it's been very interesting how that story developed. Okay, so he's sending me some of the books, and they will be here in a few days. And the hardbacks will be $25, and the proceeds that we make on it will go to the Historical Society. And if you ordered it from Amazon.com, it's $40 for the hardback. These are hardbacks, and $21.50 for the softbacks. Okay, so I think that's all my story on Tillman Justice. Oh. So people that I talked to, old people that's long gone, told me that after the hanging, they cut the rope into pieces and threw them out into the crowd as souvenirs. So people were jumping and grabbing for pieces of the rope. Well, my bus driver, when I was going to school, Newt Watson, told me he had a piece of the rope. My grandmother told me that her grandfather had a piece of the rope, but it had been lost. They didn't know it. But Newt Watson said, I've got a piece of the rope. I have it at home. I think I might have seen it a long time ago when I was a kid. And but I always knew he had one. And then his grandson, William Watson, told me one day he had the piece of the rope. And so when all this stuff developed, I called William, and he gave us the piece of the rope.
Wow.
So it came from James Watson, who was there at the hanging, to his son, Newt Watson, to his son, Frank Watson, to his son, William Watson.
Wow.
So I took this to the Goddard reunion. I've not shown it to the Justice Man. I do know the Justice Man. He's been here, and I took him along the path where he learned about his ancestry. Isn't this weird? Isn't this weird? But it's going to get weird.
Ready?
Why would you want a piece of the rope?
Okay. Ready for long ones. Again. The headline, in the carcass of a big mule, drunken men sewn comrade, and he remained 6 hours. Young Harris, Georgia, December 18th, 1910, special. Bart Brown, a young man who resides at Gumlog, of course,
Gumlog.
in this county, has had an experience similar to that undergone by the prophet Jonah, who remained for many hours in a whale's belly. Bart Brown was in the great fish. Bart Brown was in the great fish. Wait, that's not right, is it?
Yeah. Well, no, never mind. Whatever.
Yeah. Instead of being in a whale's belly, Bart Brown was in the belly of a mule, and still lives to tell the tale. Bart Brown's novel experience was the result of a practical joke played on him by half a dozen companions. All of them were drinking, and it is said that Bart Brown, practically overcome by the Mountain Dew, he had been imbibing. As the party passed down the road near Gumlaw, one of them noticed the carcass of a large mule which had just died by the roadside. The mule was called Old Humpback and had carried the mail from Brasstown to Young Harris for 7 years. Bart Brown collapsed as he and his friends passed Old Humpback's carcass, And as Brown fell, one of his party suggested that he be put into the carcass of the mule and sewed up. The suggestion appealed to the humor of the drinkers, and they went to work with knives and soon had old Humpback prepared for the reception of Brown. The unconscious man was then placed in the carcass and the skin sewed up. Brown came to after being in the mule about 4 hours and began to utter screams which had gruesome sound coming from a dead mule. Several who passed were nearly frightened out of their wits by the screams which Brown encased in old Humpback's carcass, uttered as they ran, and they ran for their dear life. At least 2 men passed who were not easily frightened, and they decided to investigate. They soon found that there was a man in the mule's body, and after they cut the stitches, Brown crawled out, bloody from head to foot, but cold sober and ragged with fright. Brown swears he has gone on the water wagon for keeps, but vows to keep even with his chums who sewed him in, old Humpback. He says that he had just the same experience as Jonah, only it was not as fast-selling. Taken from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, edition of December 19th, 1910.
Oh my goodness.
All right, so you've probably even used the term yourself. Oh, just hanging out. Well, hanging out's a crime. The state versus Luther of Brookshire for just hanging out. On March 1st, 1914, it said, he wanders and strolls about in idleness, being able to work, having no property to support him. And for that, he did then and there lead an idle, immoral life, having no property to support him, and being able to work. He did not work, and for that he was then and there able to work, having no property to support him, and having no visible or known means of fair, honest, and reputable livelihood. So, don't just hang out.
Levi Hall and Dolph Gibson for disturbing worship at Many Forks on September 1st, 1917.
That's not long.
Did then and there disturb worship service at Many Forks by talking, fussing, keeping on their hats.
Keeping on their hats.
Bruce, you're disturbing service here. Keeping on their hats, walking around, stomping on the floor, otherwise interrupting a congregation of persons lawfully assembled at Many Forks Church for divine service, contrary to the laws of said state, to good order, peace, and dignity thereof. Now, fun fact. Levi Hall is my great-great-great-grandfather on my mama's side. I'm throwing that in there because Daddy told me to. He was also a preacher at Pine Log Baptist, so go figure. He started service at Many Forks. Go on. He made sure I threw that in there.
Oh, what's on?
Yeah, you jumped
Did I
ahead.
jump one?
Yeah.
Oh, it's in there. Excuse my French now, please. Claude McConnell for obscene language in the presence of a female on March 1st, 1917. That he did unlawfully and without provocation in the presence of Margaret Birch, a female, use obscene, vulgar, and profane language. Another charge was later brought against him, but the language would shock my modesty to say in a mixed company.
So Margaret Birch was my great-great-grandmother, and so by him talking about her that way, she was charged with disturbing divine worship at Union Hill Methodist Church, and I imagine, it never said before it happened, but I imagine Claude McConnell walked in.
Claude didn't like old lady Roosevelt much either. Franklin D's wife.
The state versus W.O. Sparks for assault and battery on February 1st, 1918. W.O. Sparks, with force and arms, malice, aforethought, and knife likely to produce death, did cut, stab, and wound Ross Lloyd. Yeah, there's Ann. Where's she at? I heard her. It's her grandfather. I heard. Oh, there she is.
That must be the reason that Ross Lloyd drove Chevrolet trucks.
And
That's interesting.
W.O. Sparks was the president of the bank? Or something, banker or something. He was something at the Bank of Hiawassee.
He was
Yeah.
the first clerk.
Yeah.
So far, what do most of these crimes all have in common?
whiskey.
The whiskey.
Women.
The great majority does. So the grand jury in 1919 said, whereas the whiskey traffic in violation of the prohibition laws consumed 2/3 of the grand jury's time, and equally 2/3 of the criminal cases in Towns County, and whereas our government is calling on us to conserve the food supply for our soldier boys, and whereas the drunkards and bootleggers are looked upon in these perilous times, it's World War I, by law-abiding citizens as slackers, we recommend that all the violators of the prohibition laws be diligently prosecuted.
We are distressed to note that so many of our businessmen are disregarding the Sabbath day and violating the law by keeping their business open on this day. It is requested that the sheriff make arrests in cases where people abuse the Sunday laws, such as common labor on the Sabbath, keep open beer stands, roadhouses, and place of business, and playing baseball on Sunday. We recommend that the next grand jury indict them.
They're on a roll, this grand jury. Violation of the slot machine law has become a regular racket. Such machines are not subject to taxation. We strongly urge the sheriff to at once capture all devices and destroy them, as they only lead to gambling.
We believe our county is entering a new era and that we may expect a large number of tourists. They will be more highly impressed if they find the morals of our county good in the absence of whiskey, wine, and beer. That aged well.
So I'm glad we have an absence of whiskey, wine, and beer today. All right, the state versus Ross Brown. Traffic violation, September the 1st, 1935. So, being the operator of an automobile, the make of which is unknown to the grand jurors, he did then and there, upon approaching the Macedonia Bridge on said highway, fail to give said automobile under immediate control, and did operate the same at a greater rate of speed than 10 miles per hour. And upon approaching George Kelly, who was driving a mule wagon in the opposite direction upon said bridge, did fail to have said automobile under immediate control, and did fail to hold said automobile stationary, until said mules had a reasonable time to pass by.
Then the mule run away.
Probably did.
And in 1948, there was another case which captured the interest far and wide, in the case of State versus Jewel Eller and Charlie Garrett, for the murder of Milton Maney on August 25th, 1947. They were found guilty and sentenced to death in the electric chair on November 5th, 1948.
So, there was always a lot of talk about this. And one time I went to the courthouse to look up the trial, but it was not there. I found out since that in an appeal, the records from Towns County were taken to the state Supreme Court, I guess, to look at. So the August the 30th, 1947 Atlanta Journal had this article, and it's the longest article about it that I've seen. So I'll just read the article. Gainesville, Georgia, August the 30th. Confessions in the axe slaying of Milton Melvin Maney, 77, a retired farmer of the Hightower community in Towns County, have been obtained from two neighbors, according to J.T. McKibben, GBI investigator. The accused men brought to Hall County Jail Thursday for safekeeping are listed as Jewel Eller, 26, a farmer, maybe it's 20. I think it is 20, a farmer, and Charles Garrett, 25, former soldier and farmer. Murder warrants have been sworn out against both. According to the story told sheriffs, GBI, and state patrol representatives by Jewel Eller, 20, he and Charlie Garrett, 23, they're changing ages. Both married men of the Hightower neighborhood went to Mr. Maney's home Tuesday afternoon, saw his axe in the yard where he had been cutting wood, and asked to borrow it. He told them it was dull, but finally joined with them in trying to sharpen it. Eller's confession said that Garrett hit Mr. Maney first, and that he, Eller, could not stand to hear him groaning and struck another blow. Eller's story continued that the two men went into a nearby church, counted and divided the $168 taken from the body. Earlier, he had taken officers to the slaying scene and pointed out the wallet from which the money was taken. Eller said that he had spent his share of the money that night in Murphy. On a tip from citizens of the section that Eller and Garrett had been tracked to Boyd's Chapel, Sheriff Ed Barnard of Towns County went to Garrett's home at midnight Wednesday, found Eller there also, both fully dressed, and arrested them. Later, Garrett was brought to jail here, Gainesville. The next day, Eller also was brought here, Gainesville. Friday afternoon, officers still had not obtained a statement from Garrett. At the coroner's inquest Wednesday afternoon at Mr. Maney's home on Hightower, it was brought out that he was reputed often to carry $1,000 to $1,500 on his person, and that he had deposited $900 of it in a bank the day or two previously. Only $2 in change was found on his body. Discovery of the slaying was made by Buren Hunter, the nearest neighbor living about a mile distance, who had gone to the home to buy some apples. Mr. Maney had only recently moved back to the old home place, now owned by two sons. So, they were found guilty. And the judge sentenced them to the electric chair. They had quit hanging people in the 1920s and went to the electric chair. So they were sentenced to the electric chair. Does anybody know where the electric chair is? Where? Jackson. All right. So there's a lot of talk about this, and I heard a lot of talk about it, and I never really wanted to investigate because there were people that were talking about this would hurt. It would hurt. So I never really tried to get information from people. Miss Denton at the bank, that was her daddy. Jewel Eller, his last words were, "Wherever you may go and whatever you may do, tell your children and the neighbor's children not to drink whiskey and stay out of bad company, because whiskey is the cause of me sitting here in this chair today." Okay. So for Charlie Garrett, he's from Hightower. Both of them were soldiers from World War II. Charlie Garrett got a Purple Heart. He was hurt and sent to England. I forgot the town. He sent to England to recuperate. And while he was recuperating, there was a pretty young thing calling, and they went dancing and having a good time. Her name was Jennifer Strachan, and her family remembers him well. They say he had such a pretty smile. He laughed all the time. He was happy, and he loved to take the girls dancing in England. He comes back home, and at some point, her name's Maisie. Yeah, Maisie. I think her name's Maisie. I forgot. Anyhow, he has this girlfriend, and he also had a wife here. Her name was Ruth. She was buried at Lower Hightower. So it was the girl in England came up pregnant, if you can imagine. And so her parents went down to the Army headquarters, and one story is that they asked for address of Charlie Garrett, and the Army refused to give out anybody's address. Another story is that they gave an address, and the people did write him that he had a child over there, and he had a wife that could read and write. So He never knew, according to the people here, that he had the baby in England. So as time goes on, this little girl, the little girl's named Jennifer. Little Jennifer's 80-something now. And she did not want to die without ever having seen a picture of her dad. So her grandson got on the World Wide Web and Facebook, and somehow I got tracked down. And I didn't know what to tell him. I didn't want to tell him that he died in the electric chair. I didn't want to tell him he was an axe murderer, but they already knew that. They had found it on the internet. But it didn't matter. She wanted a picture of her dad before she died. So they found some of the Garretts in Greenville, South Carolina. Not cooperative at all. So they wanted me to find a picture of the dad. Well, how do you find a needle in a haystack? I did know a lawyer in Atlanta who's from here and from Upper Hightower. And I said, well, wouldn't there be a mugshot somewhere? And he said, yes. And he was trying to find a mugshot. But, you know, the privacy stuff, they don't just give out stuff to nobodies. So he gave me the information of how to get that, to give it to the people in England so they could get it. Well, before that could happen, the people in England got one of the relatives in South Carolina to crack. And she promised that she let him see the picture of him in World War II with his uniform on. So the people in England decided they were going to come trace their ancestors to Towns County, which is very unusual. Most people don't trace ancestors to Towns County, from England anyhow. So, to make a long story short, they did come here on July the 5th and stayed, and I took them around, and we had a wonderful time. Steve Eller helped on that little project, and I took them to Hightower the first day. I mean, that's where their heritage was. They loved it. They loved the scenery. They loved everything about it. But who could I take them to that might tell them something about Charlie Garrett? Well, I searched high and low, and the name came as Totsie Anderson. So I talked to Totsie's daughter and said, can I bring these strangers from England to talk to your mother? She said, well, sure. And I said, well, it's not a very pleasant thing. I said, well, she'll talk to them. So we went to see Totsie. I have the greatest respect for Totsie Anderson. She's a really nice, wonderful lady. And there we sat. Oh, there's Jennifer. That's the lady. That's the baby born in 1945 or whenever. That's her daughter. The baby born in England was too old to come, and her health wasn't right. But her daughter and her husband and her son, they came. There they are coming to Towns County, and I was apprehensive about taking them to the Old Rock jail. That's where Charlie and Jewel would have been imprisoned at the beginning. But we went, and Sandra Green was there and gave them the grand tour, and they loved it. And there's the grandson, Byron, behind iron bars. And here we are at Totsie Anderson's, and they're related. We went to Boyd's Chapel Cemetery, and they said, well, 75% of these people are our relatives, and it's true. And that many on Hightower, too. And I took them to Towns County Veterans Monument, where Charlie Garrett's name is on it, and that was very meaningful to them. And so when they went back to England, well, let me okay, so I take them here, take them to Bell Mountain, and take them, and they wanted to see Charlie's grave. Well, Charlie's buried in Greenville, South Carolina. So they went out there and met some of the people. As the people had finally all softened, and decided they weren't here to get their money. And so they had a wonderful time in South Carolina. They visited the grave. And then the next day they had a relative in Rabun County that had the stuff. Like all of the letters that he wrote when he was in prison. And the big picture. And the Purple Heart. But nobody can find the Purple Heart anymore. But some of the families got it. Okay, so what am I forgetting?
Had his discharge papers too.
Say what?
Had his discharge papers, copy of his
Yes.
DD 214.
Yeah.
And all kinds of pictures, the uniform, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, that lady in Reagan had all kinds of good. She had the, so, well, you see right here it is. There it is, and there's the little baby pouring over everything about her dad. Now, so Totsy Anderson remembered Charlie Garrett, and she said he was fun, he smiled, he laughed, he was jovial. Nothing like you would think is an axe murderer. Well, and then Totsy said he came back from the war, and he was not the same. Not the same. For instance, he'd get upset about something and his fist would go through a wall. He was not the same. Well, that daughter works in a prison in England, and she works with people who have had these personality changes. And she diagnosed him as having PTSD, which I do believe. The doctors, they didn't do PTSD back in that day. So we think he was. And then if they were drinking and he got caught up in something, it's like he went berserk. So whatever. I don't know what happened. And I'm not trying to make light of it. But the people from England did not go home feeling like they came from an axe murder.
Oh, good.
They went back home with a good story to tell their mother of all the good things that they heard here in Towns County and on Hightower. So,
Is this the mother?
that's the baby that was born in World War II when he was over there. Her name's Jennifer, and her daughter is Sharon.
Did the family give them stuff to take back?
Oh, yes, a ton of stuff, just like Steve said, a ton of stuff. Because the stuff had been hoarded by two aunts, and both had died, and the woman that had inherited it all said, "Oh, this doesn't mean anything to me. It's not mine. I have nobody to give it to. Here." So she gave it. So I told you Jewel Eller's last words. Well, here's Charlie Corn's last letter to his mother. Charlie Garrett's. His middle name was Corn. Here's Charlie Garrett's last letter to his mother. Reidsville, Georgia, October the 27th, 1948. My dearest darling mother. And his dearest darling mother was named Fidelia Garrett, and her husband was Joseph Sumlin Garrett. And they're buried in South Carolina too. My dearest darling mother, I received your kind, sweet letter tonight and was very glad to hear from you. This leaves me well and feeling fine and doing my best to serve Christ, Jesus, as my Savior. Mother, you ask where I wanted to be buried. I had rather be buried in South Carolina if it is God's will that I must die. Mother, I wonder why they cut my stay, but why they cut my stay, and if you can find out. I guess, yeah, stay of execution. I wonder why they cut my stay, and if you can find out, please let me know. Want some of you all to come down here to see me just as soon as you possibly can, for I want to talk to some of you. Mother dear, please do not worry about me any more than you can help, for I feel that I am ready to meet God when He calls me. If you see any of Greenville's folks, that's Greenville Gary, they live on Hightower, tell them I said hello for me. I will try to write you every day and let you know how I'm getting along, and you write every time that you can. I had rather be buried in South Carolina, but if you want me buried there at home, it's all right. If Daddy comes down to see me, I will tell him more about it. Mother, I know that it's very hard on you and Dad, but Dad knows best, and I am trusting in Him for all things. Please think of me if I should have to go as being. Please think of me as if I should have to go as being saved, and that I will be in a much better place and will be at peace. Yes, Mother. Jewel said that he did not kill Maney by himself, and that I helped him. Well, Mother, I guess I'd better close for tonight, sending all my love to you and Dad. Good night, and say God bless you and Dad. Your loving son, Charlie C. Garrett, and then it gives his address. So that's his last words. And so, is there anything else? So with that concludes our crime and punishment.